Maddie's Wake by M.G. Gallows. 1 month after Death Dealers. I couldn't move. My body felt empty, and yet too heavy to lift. Every breath was a struggle. When I tried to cough or swallow, pain lanced through my throat. The city rushed by outside the car. I knew the men I was with, but I couldn't place their names. The big football player was behind the wheel. Next to me, a tall, skinny choir boy held something to my neck, and a short one with the ratty hair stared at me like a deer in the headlights. And Max. He sat up front, and I could see blood on his face in the rear view. He gave his hands a 1,000-yard stare. Oh God, they roofied me, I thought. Some distant part of my brain laughed. They wouldn't need more drugs to put me under. They parked in the yard of a shitty little house in a dark, empty neighborhood and carried me to the front door. I knew what was coming. I wanted to scream, to puke, or shit myself. Anything to convince them to leave me alone. But I couldn't even flex my fists. The front door opened to their frantic knocks. They swept me in and carried me to a bed. It smelled like rainwater and fresh soil. I could see my body. Blood stained my clothes. My skin was so pale it was almost blue. I gargled on it, and it dribbled down my neck from a hole in my throat. I could almost feel the torn flesh. The bleeding vein. Max. He wasn't there, but the names of the others bubbled up in my mind. Don, Jeb, and Frank. They hovered over me, shouting and hysterical. The rave, the music. My pusher Tyler, with his syrettes of Stig. One chemical in each wrist. One blue, the other red. Turning purple as they mixed in the heart. One hell of a high. A darkness you wanted to wrap yourself in. It felt like dying. A new face shouldered past them. The house must have been his, because he was in his boxers. I wanted to laugh, but I gargled on blood. It brought reality into focus. Jeb darted into another room and returned with a dinky little first aid kit. The guy in his boxers tried to press handfuls of gauze to my neck. Did none of these assholes know how to treat a wound? Or dial 911? His voice was suddenly clear in my ears. Get out, all of you. The frat boys fled, leaving me alone with the stranger. He knelt beside the bed, and his face twisted into a grimace. His eyes, dark blue like midnight skies or deep oceans, locked on mine. I'm sorry, he whispered. This is all my fault. If I hadn't let them. I didn't know what he was talking about, but his eyes became distant. Thoughtful. The room cooled a few degrees, but I chalked it up to blood loss. His eyes met mine again. I can help you. You won't like it. It will hurt. It will leave you different. It's not a choice you should have to make, but I can let you die, or I can do something that may feel worse than dying. You won't understand. You'll never understand, even if we had time. You won't be alive, but you won't be dead. That's the best I can do, kid. He took a long, shaky breath. One blink for yes, 2 blinks and I let you go. Confused, terrified, intoxicated, and dying, I couldn't understand what he was saying or asking of me. But I didn't want to die. It took everything I had left, but I blinked and squeezed his hand as hard as I could. He rose to his feet and hurried out of the room. I tried to call out, thinking he hadn't felt my grip, that he was going to leave me to die alone. My heart pounded in my ears slower and slower and slower, struggling. And stopped. I woke with a scream that rattled the windows. Flailing in the darkness, I hit a wall and pressed myself against it. After a few seconds of panic, I recognized my bed, surrounded by boxes of stuff I meant to unpack weeks ago. I spotted my terrified reflection in the vanity on the opposite wall. Footsteps approached my room and knuckles rapped on my door. It opened, revealing a burly silhouette that would put shit to pants if you spotted it in a dark alley or abandoned campground. Madelyn? His voice was deep but soft-spoken. Are you okay? Yeah, bad dreams. I took a long breath to calm myself and pulled my blanket around my shoulders. He hesitated, and a metallic smell wafted into my room. I shuddered. I'm fine. Okay, sorry. He shut the door, and I heard him descend a ladder in the kitchen. I grabbed the phone off my narrow nightstand. 4 a.m. With a groan, I put my earbuds in, found a track by Death Razor in my music library, and cranked the volume. My brain wouldn't let me sleep. There are all kinds of alarms, fail-safes, and autonomic systems in your head that keep you alive. When something bad happens, your brain registers it as discomfort and pain. It produces chemicals to deal with the problem. So every night was the same. I'd drift off for a few minutes, and my brain would register that my heart had stopped and hit me with adrenaline to get it moving again. I wanted to sleep, but it terrified me because I knew my brain would shock me to consciousness. It was driving me insane to save me. Life sucks when you're dead. I watched daybreak through my window. I wasn't sure if I had slept. My consciousness felt like dried pudding skin stretched over a clotted brain. I pleaded with the sun to show mercy, but it had none. Tempted as I was to stay in bed all day, the smell of bacon and coffee was too seductive. I swung my legs off the bed, found some cleanish socks, yesterday's jeans, and pulled on a fresh shirt. A black baby tee that Mary had made. It said "High on Life" in bold white across the chest. She'd made it to celebrate my sobriety after finding out I was a user and had sworn to get clean. I loved my sister, but the irony made me wince. Whatever. I sat at my vanity and ran a hand through the black spiky locks coming off one side of my head. I kept the other half shaved bald. I couldn't remember what spurred the emo goth look. Rebelliousness? The music I loved? You don't look like you this way, I reminded myself, to be anyone but me. But now the look was me, broken bitch chick. I'd lapsed in my routine though, because my ginger roots showed I'd have to fix it. They say drugs can make you look haggard and older than you were, and I believed it. My reflection looked every bit the burned out junkie after photo that anti-drug PSAs like to scare people with. Coupled with a month without a good night's sleep and, the whole dead thing, and I looked like a gnarled crone who lurked in swamps waiting for lost children to wander by. Okay, maybe not that bad, but when you feel it, you see it. To cover the flaws, I put on my armor. I liked piercings. Ears, eyebrows, nose, lips, they distracted from my face and gave me a bit more flash. I finished with a little metal rib cage that fit over the bridge of my nose. It was my favorite. I'd thought about getting more further down, but when you're flat as a board and like tight shirts, piercings stick out like radio dials and everyone wants to find their favorite station. Whatever. I slunk into the living room and sat on the L couch with a groan. Alex's place was tiny, but he kept it Spartan. Only my room looked like a squatter's hovel. The man himself was in the kitchen with his back to me, in jeans and a faded t-shirt. He sounded rested, though I knew he'd been awake most of the night. It wasn't fair. Hug, he asked over his shoulder, mimicking my groan. A hug. That bad, huh? He put a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in my hands and set a big mug of coffee in front of me. While he returned to the kitchen, I took a long drink. I'd never tell him, but Alex's coffee made sex feel like a lecture on paint coalescence. Like if I had to choose between a day trip to a spa with a sexy masseuse or a fresh cup of Alex's coffee, the masseuse would have to throw in $50 to seal the deal. Loaded with sugar like I preferred. It was like a reverse hug, warming a body stuck at room temp. I don't know how he did it. I thought he used magic, but despite the cliches, there's no real overlap between coffee and necromancy. It was my life preserver while enduring night after night of panic attacks. Alex sat near the TV with his own breakfast and shoveled the food in his mouth like a soldier. He'd mentioned something about being a ranch hand when he was my age in one of our conversations. It explained his size. He wasn't huge or a bodybuilder, but he had those dense muscles that come from days of labor and lifting. There were scars, too. Long slashes from a bullwhip, of all things, including one that had split his lips to the teeth. He'd only recently got the stitches removed, but the mark of violence was unmistakable. No piercing would hide that. How are you feeling? He asked. I blinked, pulled out of my thoughts.
What? Oh.
Meh, can't sleep. Alex set his empty plate on the coffee table and turned to face me. Bad dreams. Part of it. I rubbed my neck. Adjusting takes time. Instead of answering, I poked at my food. He always loaded my plate too much. Did he think I was too skinny? It's not just the trauma, I said. Okay, I've got some pit seeds. But it's more than that. I can't sleep at all. Heart troubles again? None of the other whites mentioned heart problems. Then I'm a shitty fucking white. I smacked my plate on the coffee table so I wouldn't throw it across the room. He sighed. Jeb has a kind of group circle thing going on at the Gallows every week, I think. Maybe talking about it with the others could help. I snorted. Yeah, pour my heart out to the guys who helped get me killed. Madeline. They. I don't need some second-year med student trying to psychoanalyze me. My hand shook, and I pulled my knees to my chin. I got that shit from real doctors. The best they ever prescribed was more goddamn pills. I swallowed. The idea of chemical tranks was appealing, and the realization surprised me. 2 or 3 before bed, and I'd be 2 out of it to get the adrenaline spike, right? Tempting. Too fucking tempting. But if I went to a doctor for another prescription, he'd want to take my blood pressure, check my pulse, and all that. He'd flip when he realized I wasn't technically alive. What else was there? Something over the counter. Nighttime cough syrup, a pint of something hard. I licked my lips. A strong whiskey would do it. Jesus, you're not an hour out of bed, I thought. How's your hunger? Alex asked. I avoided his gaze. He wasn't talking about bacon and eggs. Undead bodies don't age or rot. Alex's necromancy, woven into my body and soul, kept me going. But it wasn't a finite resource. A white, your bottom-tier smart zombie, has 2 ways to maintain that energy. The most important is our grave soil. We're bound to where we were buried or where we died. Alex had snuck an old urn home from his job at a mortuary and sealed my soil inside. As long as I stayed close, it sustained me indefinitely. But if I got more than, say, 20 feet from it, the magic would weaken. I would decay, slowly at first, slower than a natural decomp, but the effect was cumulative. The withering translated to my brain as a kind of ache, a deep-rooted craving that only one thing would satisfy. People. Human flesh. Didn't matter if it was fresh, frozen, or carrion. It was the only thing that replenished a white's undead batteries. Returning to my grave soil would pause the degradation, but it wouldn't reverse it. Alex monitored everyone's hunger, all the whites who lived in the Gallows underground, after what had happened to Max and me. Fine, I insisted after too long a pause. I ate last week. I've barely left the house. He nodded, but he looked pensive. Probably reading my mood or my thoughts with his death magic. I didn't know what he was capable of. Hell, I still didn't know if I could trust him. Sure, he saved my life and my soul, and he'd given me a place to stay and covered for me with my mom. He was putting his own money forward to help me return to college. Plus, being undead had sobered me. It had canceled out a lot of the withdrawal symptoms, saved me from months of recovery. Silver linings, as Alex would say. But I had no idea what else his magic could do. I'd seen him inflict fear on people and control corpses like they were puppets with invisible strings. I had nothing but his word that he wouldn't turn that power on me, force me to do whatever he wanted. He finished his coffee, I think. The phone rang from his bedroom. Not his old landline, the burner phone he used for his second job. He frowned and went to answer it. Another gravedigger job. I shivered. Feeding the Gallows was a big ethical quandary. Stealing it from hospitals was a big risk, and robbing graves was messy. It wasn't like he could stalk victims in the street like a serial killer. That was an easy way to get the axe from the Rimbault Society. Some super secret conspiracy of wizards who, in Alex's words, ran everything. Ultra-rich, magical Big Brother types who enforced the edicts or the laws they invented to police the world's mages. They took a grim view of magic and magical creatures exposing themselves to the untold. Ordinary people. So Alex solved the problem by taking jobs from a black market guy named Piotr, who hired Alex to dispose of bodies and clean murder scenes. And death is steady business. To hear my dad talk about it, the city used to have a huge crime problem. The big syndicates, the Russians, Yakuza, Tongs, even the Italians were all over the place. Then, in the mid-'80s, things got quiet. No one is sure what changed things, but the number of cops and civilians being murdered each year flatlined, and the municipal budget got a big boost for its urban renewal campaigns. Uptown and the rich bitch districts across the river sprouted up overnight. That didn't mean the crime stopped, of course. My mom had a cousin who worked in sewage, and he said there were more human bones in the city's drains than there were rats to gnaw them. But everyone decided that if the crooks were going to stick to killing themselves, it was worth it. The mob had its own way to dispose of bodies, but lesser gangs found it easier to call in a third party, Piotr, who used Alex. Being a necromancer made it easy for him to clean away physical evidence, earning him a decent amount of money per job. Then he brought the bodies home and butchered them in his makeshift basement abattoir, under the trapdoor in the kitchen. Remember that part about Alex being kind of intimidating? Yeah. I couldn't bring myself to be around when he worked. You don't want to know how the sausage is made. But it was a loophole the society barely tolerated. He'd also tried to convince me that no gang would hire a freelancer to get rid of an innocent victim. He'd used the word probably a lot. Alex came out of his room with his jacket on. I'm off. How many is this? I asked. 13 in 2 weeks, he said. The Mambas are pushing to regain their turf now that the brothers Midnight are gone. And you're bringing it home in broad daylight. No, I'll keep it stowed till after work. You want me to drop you off somewhere? The Gallows. I shook my head. No, I'll be fine. He hesitated. Look, Madeline, I'm fine, I insisted. Call me before you bring it home. Sure, kid. He was out the door and heading for his rusty piece of shit truck before I could respond. When the rumble of tires over gravel faded, I went to the fridge. There was a disturbing lack of booze and junk food inside, but I spied a bottle of honey mead in the meat drawer and grabbed it. Sure, it was 10 a.m. on a Thursday, but to quote a famous lawyer, I hadn't slept in days. I sat in my chair and took a long gulp. The sweet floral taste hit my tongue. The alcohol burned my throat, and it quenched a dull, aching thirst in me. I shuddered. It felt too good, good enough to hurt. The beep from my phone made me jump. Hey, long time no see, it said. Amy. I hadn't seen her in a while. When had I seen her last? Christ, it was last July, that beach party with those guys. Yeah, had some shit to deal with. Life sucks right now. You. Same old, same old. Keith is having a party tonight. You want to join? Miss you. I didn't know Keith. Or maybe I did. Alcohol, drugs, and death had left the past 2 or 3 years of my life a puzzle where none of the pieces matched. Maybe they never would. Collecting blackouts had been my hobby for too goddamn long. The mead bottle found its way to my lips. Maybe where? West Green and 40th, the house with the big triangle over the front door. She sent me a photo and I found the directions online. It was northeast in the rich part of town. Amy had moved up in the world, or her usual crowd had conned some poor rich dickhead into hosting one of their holiday shindigs. I was about to answer an affirmative, but paused. You're already on the edge, Maddie. Your mom wanted you to stay clean. She wanted you to finish school, and both she and Alex have bent over backwards to help you get on your feet. You want to get shit-faced? What happens if you black out again? You died last time. I pushed that thought from my head. No. It wasn't going to be like that again. Max was dead. No one was going to hurt me. What if I hurt someone? My body shook. What would happen if I got drunk and hungry and attacked someone? Someone else could end up like me. Then Alex would have to reanimate them as a white right after he capped my skull for breaking his cardinal rule, the one he'd killed Max over. We do not eat the living. I stared at Amy's message. My throat was dry, thirsty. I'll think about it. I set the phone down, found some cartoons on TV that weren't Christmas specials, and took another deep swig of mead. It didn't have to get shit-faced. I just needed a good buzz going. The mead was strong enough. Yeah. I jumped in my seat with a scream. The empty bottle of mead fell from my lap and banged off the coffee table, scattering a plate of cold bacon and eggs. Shocked and trembling, I looked around and tried to make sense of where I was. Alex's living room. A made-for-TV movie romanticizing child labor as a way to buy more Christmas gifts and thus solve a family's marriage troubles cast the room in reds and greens. The streets outside were rainy. It always rains on the Northwest coast, even in December. But there was still some daylight beyond the storm clouds. I forced myself to breathe and grab the fallen bottle. There wasn't a drop left, and I still hadn't put myself under. Crushing down a sob, I smacked myself in the chest. Beat, goddamn you, I screamed in my head. You're fucking killing me. I wanted to cry myself back to unconsciousness, but I knew it would only lead to the same result. The clock on Alex's microwave said 4 p.m., but how much of that counted as sleep? My mind was so exhausted that I couldn't remember anything after I last texted Amy. I checked my phone and noted the low charge. She'd left me a ton of messages, all of them more or less the same as the last. You come in or not. I flicked off the TV and sat in the darkness for a moment. The rainwater slush on the windows threatened to lull me to sleep again. I wanted to, so much. But I knew it wouldn't work. I stared at the bottle. Suddenly thirsty, I messaged Amy. On my way. I put my phone in my room to charge, threw on a coat, and started hiking for the bus stop. A little rainwater doesn't bother the dead. West Green was a suburb full of pre-built McMansions. Each one had a huge yard, meaning lots of privacy and distance from the neighbors. The buses don't come around to that part of town. The locals don't like reminders of poverty ruining their view. I had to disembark at a nearby mall and hike almost 6 blocks. It wasn't hard to find the house Amy mentioned. About 24 cars sat out front, a sloppy string of colored lights circled the front door, and the music was pounding so loud I assumed the neighbors were on holiday. A bit early for a Christmas party, but fuck it. I started getting eyeballs the moment I walked in. Probably because it was wall-to-wall big jocks in jeans and muscle shirts, low-key flexing and soaked in aftershave. Most were older than me, but there was no way a junior or sophomore could pull together a party of that size. Maybe a football team or two, all lured on the promise of getting a slice. And there I was like a fresh pizza full of dependency issues and poor life choices. Some were cute, but none were my type. Testosterone poisoning isn't my thing. Maddie. Amy materialized out of the crowd like a tiny ghost and pulled me into a hug, not shy, where her hand squeezed. My God, where have you been? You look like shit. Thanks, I muttered. Got anything to drink? She took my hand and led me through the crowd like some kind of mystical party gnome. Amy was small, only about 4'10", and a gymnast's build. She had dressed for the prowl in tight booty shorts and a sports bra that showed off curves I had never been blessed with. The fearlessness of her attire was shameless and kind of hot. We stopped in what I assumed was the kitchen, but wall to wall it was standing room only. Amy reached between two people and produced a cold 40-ounce of beer. I opened it and took a few deep chugs to rekindle my buzz. A few nearby guys laughed and clapped at the sight. Easy, huh, Amy said. Night's still young. Been up for days, I grunted. No shit, Amy asked. Come on. Let's get you settled. We snaked out of the room and went upstairs, traversing an obstacle course of people crowding the stairs. She knocked on a closed door, and it opened to a small bedroom with a circle of couches around a big bowl of smoking kush. The only light in the room was a miniature fiber optic Christmas tree that shifted from blue to red to purple and back. The air was heavy with smoke. I took a deep breath as we claimed an open patch of couch, but my undead lungs failed to register the hit. Alex had said inhaled or injected poisons wouldn't affect me. Necromancy replaced oxygen dependency. No one had thought to bring edibles either, which was bullshit. But I still had the 40. I took a few long gulps and eased into the chair. Someone passed me a blunt, without a word, and I took a deep hit before Amy snatched it from me. Digging deep tonight? What, did your mom make you visit a convent or something, she asked? I shook my head in a cloud of acrid smoke. The blunt hadn't worked, and I was already desperate for something harder. No, I was at that rave on the docks the police hit. You were on the Caribbean Sunset, one stoner asked. No shit. I hesitated. Yeah. Hot damn, said another guy. I knew friends who were at that. They said some kind of cult tried to poison everyone. Did you get poisoned, Amy asked me. No, I said. Just, blitzed. Woke up with a bunch of people on the Lido deck. Did anyone die? A woman asked through a cloud of smoke. A couple. Their morbid curiosity creeped me out. I don't know. The cops wouldn't say. The cops. Amy relaxed into her buzz. No wonder you dropped out of sight. Mom found out. Yeah, I got stuck with a life coach. Is he that guy you're living with now? Amy asked. I blinked. How do you know? She shrugged. Lil and Roxy saw him at the college with you. I recalled Lil and Roxy as sisters. Maybe redheads like me, but few other details. Christ, getting sober was like waking from a coma. Yeah, they got me back in class this semester. The blunt came my way again. I figured I'd play along with the routine, but took a shallow puff. Amy grinned. Didn't think you were into dangerous-looking types. What? I coughed acrid smoke. No, it's not like that. Come on, don't play me. Amy took the blunt. Can't imagine he's got much money, but maybe he doesn't need it if he's got it where it counts. I'm not fucking him, I said. Seriously, Amy laughed. Why not? Did he find Jesus in prison? Is he gay? No, I insisted. Look, can we drop it? He ain't here. She shrugged and passed the blunt on. Then what's his deal? He's a friend. He's trying to help me get clean. The boat was a wake-up call. Amy looked disappointed, but also kind of sympathetic. Your loss. I kind of like to hit that. So is he any good at keeping you clean? I'm here, aren't I? The words made me flinch. I leaned back with a sigh. Getting to sleep has been hard. Not because of that. I dunno. I guess it's withdrawal. Pussy ass shit, the first guy blurted out. Withdrawal ain't no problem if you don't quit. So do you still know where to get some stig? The woman asked and handed me the blunt. Or did they take the secret with them to prison or wherever? I passed it to Amy. I need some air. You just got here, Amy said, but she didn't follow me. Once I was free of the ineffective smoke, I chugged almost half of the 40. I needed more than beer unless I wanted to be pissing like a racehorse all night. So I left it on the bathroom sink as I passed and descended into the crowd. The music rose, and I couldn't shout over the noise, so I tapped a guy's shoulder and pantomimed being lifted off the ground. He nodded and hefted me by my armpits to let me scout the area. I tried to ignore the way he squeezed his fingers around my torso before he set me down. I'd spotted my target. A liquor cabinet near the big screen TV stocked with scotch and vodka. Not my usual, but they had the potency I craved. As I reached for one, a hand enclosed around my wrist. Those aren't yours. The guy grabbing my arm was good-looking, but his smug half-grin was a little too trust fund princeling. Who are you? I grunted. This is my place, he said. I'm Ben. Your place. Right. What happened to Keith? I'm looking for something harder. I winced at the unintended innuendo. It's this way. He didn't give me a choice. He pulled me by my arm and kept me close. Maybe he thought his cologne was attractive. We passed the kitchen and descended into the basement. The ceiling rumbled overhead, and I thought it would collapse under the weight of the bodies above us. A short hallway of closed doors led us to a rec room designed to look like a rich person's interpretation of a public bar. My eyes lingered on racks of wine and spirits behind a counter, and then followed the room to a large poker table with a game already in progress. 6 people, 3 men and 3 women, clutched handfuls of cards and exchanged shots of whatever was on hand. I snorted. They were playing strip poker. I set my hands on my hips. Are you shitting me? Ben shrugged and grinned. 50 to buy in. Anyone who loses has to take a shot and lose a piece of clothing. He looked me over. Winner keeps the pot. Fuck that, I told myself. Just go buy some booze, Maddie. Can't play with an odd number, a girl at the table said. From the look and sound of her, she'd lost a few hands already. I licked dry lips. Losing my clothes for a bunch of strangers was not on the agenda. But I wasn't alone. Amy was just upstairs. A few stiff shots to get comfortable. I could lose a few rounds, enough to get my money's worth, then bow out. All it would cost me was a 50 and a bit of skin. Fine, I said. I dug out my cash. Every dime I had left. Deal me in. The night wasn't an awful experience at first. I lost a few rounds, mostly on purpose, and by then I was feeling a lot more relaxed. I doffed my socks and pants to prove I wasn't a pussy. The music from upstairs was good. Laughter and cheers surrounded me. I don't remember if or when the atmosphere changed, or if I only saw it in retrospect. The alcohol kept flowing, but the game fell apart into random cards and unprovoked laughter. One girl, down to her skivvies and a Santa cap, tossed off her bra to reveal an impressive pair of double Ds. The entire table whooped while she shook them for us. The guy next to her pulled her onto his lap, and suddenly they weren't interested in cards anymore. I got it in my head that I could do a better job and sat on Ben's knee, gyrating in what I thought was a sexy belly dance. His arm circled around my waist. I'd been in worse places with worse guys. The shots kept coming, and I grabbed each one. It's what I was there for. It's what I wanted. But each shot made me feel different. I went back and forth on whether I was being roofied or just so burned out from exhaustion that the alcohol hit me extra hard. It felt like the night of the rave when a cocktail of booze and stig had left me flying high. Too high to control myself. How Max had found me. My thoughts blurred from memory to reality. One moment I was dancing to thunderous music in a warehouse. The next I was in the basement at the poker table. One player, the third woman, had left, but Ben's buddies had the topless girl between them, and they weren't dancing. Ben still had me by the waist, and he was whispering something to me. Then I was back in the rave, surrounded by a sea of bodies, all pressing in around me, an abyss of human flesh to be lost in. A face materialized from the crowd. Max. He yelled over the noise. He wanted to talk. I didn't care. I barely knew him. How long had we dated? A few months? Weeks? It was a blur of drugs and underground music. I couldn't remember when he'd vanished. Hell, I didn't remember meeting him. Then he showed up again, acting like we were still a thing. He shouted over the music, something about not answering his calls and abandoning him. He grabbed my arm, trying to take me out of the crowd. I shook my head and was back in the basement, but the room had changed. I was on a bed in the dark. Ben had his arms around me, still whispering something lost to the noise above us. He was too close. I tried to push him off, but he kept his grip on my waist. Max shouted in my face. I screamed and fought in his grip. Then I was in a third place, a rundown hotel room somewhere in the city. I put a black bottle to my lips and drank deep. It was like raw turpentine, but I didn't care. I took it all, and when the bag of acid reached me, I licked my finger and pressed a strip to my tongue to the applause of a stranger. I vomited into a sink, bile-spotted with blood. Max grabbed me, slapped me, hit me. Ben pushed me onto my back. I woke up in a shitty hotel next to someone I didn't recognize. I wanted to die. I was on the Caribbean sunset, surrounded by the dying. Coils of the coldest, most putrid evil magic you can imagine snared my soul and dragged me into a bottle. I screamed and pounded on the solid glass. The magic was consuming me, liquid darkness that burned like acid, unraveling my consciousness. Max grabbed me, teeth bared. Ben dropped his pants, a drunk and cruel look in his eyes. I drew in a breath and screamed. The keening rattled windows and set off car alarms. Ben's grip on me weakened, and I kicked him as hard as I could. He bounced against the wall, tripping over the pants around his ankles. My mind came into crystal focus. I was in an unfamiliar bedroom, and that asshole Ben had pushed a dresser in front of the door to bar it. Get the fuck off me. I grabbed what clothes I could find and went for the door. He grabbed my wrist. The fuck are you doing? I said, get off. I struggled in his grip, his athlete's physique versus my scrawny body, and that bit of extra strength whites get. It made us more or less equal, though he had to have 70 or 80 pounds on me. I didn't fight clean. Clean is for boxing and movies. I shoved, kicked, stomped, and spat. With a snarl, he yanked me off my feet and hurled me over the bed. I bounced off it onto the floor. You fucking bitch. He grabbed my hair in his fist and shoved me against a wall, his elbow pressed into the crook of my neck. The fuck is wrong with you? He got in close enough that I couldn't kick him, so I bared my teeth. We do not eat the living. I realized what I was about to do. If I went zombie on him, it would mean a bullet to the head from someone I saw as a friend, despite all the horror that surrounded our first meeting. If I gave in to the urge to tear Ben's fucking face off, it would be suicide. Don't move, Ben growled in my ear. I fought. He wrapped his hand around my neck and squeezed. It would have frightened me if I needed to breathe anymore. I couldn't call for help, though. Where the fuck was everyone? I still heard music upstairs. Hadn't anyone heard the scream? Where the fuck was Amy? Why hadn't she come looking for me? Did they seriously not care? Were these the people I had surrounded myself with? Had I drifted from one party, one bed to the next, and had nothing to show for it but a body and mind run ragged? 3 years lost in a pool of drugs and mindless submission that only ended when I died. Ben kneed my legs apart. His clumsy hands twisted my tits and pulled my hair. You need to smile more, bitch, smile. He hooked his fingers into my lips and pulled them apart in a grimace. Smile for me. I clenched my jaw so tight the joint creaked. Okay, I thought, fuck this. I bit into his finger below the first joint. We whites weren't super strong, but we had some impressive biting power. My first taste of human flesh had been frozen. I chewed through it like a waffle. The tip of Ben's finger came off with one hard snap. His eyes bulged at the sight of his bloody stump. He released me with a scream, dropped to one knee, and grabbed for his pants. I got away from him, grabbed the dresser, and tipped it onto the floor. You bitch. Ben's voice had dipped into a threatening growl. I whirled, and he stabbed a pocket knife into my chest, right into my heart. We both stared at it, and the house seemed to fall silent. He took a few steps back, and the rage in his eyes turned cold. Cruel. Evil. He'd lured me to his game, got me drunk, tried to rape me, and when he wouldn't take no for an answer, he'd tried to kill me. The knife jutting from my ribs didn't hurt. I felt dead inside. How many times had scenarios like that played out for me, or for anyone? Because they saw a broken girl and thought she'd be easy pickings. Tear me open, empty me out, and throw me away. Like a ketchup packet. I could see the scenario playing itself out. If this was Ben's place, that meant he came for money. His dad would get a great lawyer. He could argue that it had been a crime of passion, that it wasn't his fault. We were having sex, he'd say to the judge. Then she attacked me, bit my finger right off. I was defending myself, Your Honor. It wasn't rape. She was into it. And he'd go on with his life, quietly patting himself on the shoulder for getting away with my murder. He'd put it all behind him if I dropped dead right there. But I didn't. I pulled the knife out of me and threw it next to his severed finger. I was so fucking sick of being the victim. With a growl, I tackled him onto the bed and forced his hands apart. He saw it coming in one glorious moment of fear and panic. I sank my teeth into his nose and tore it free with a crack of cartilage. Blood soaked his face, and he let out a gargled scream. Live with that, you fucker, I thought. Remember what you did to me every time you look in a mirror. I spat the hunk of flesh at him. I'm smiling now. The creepy affection in my voice made me shudder. Something heavy hit the door and I jumped. Was it Ben's buddies? The cops? A solid blow snapped the door in half and sent part of it to the floor. The room chilled a few degrees as Alex entered the room. Wisps of fog leaked off his flesh, a byproduct of his magic when his anger was boiling over. His eyes met mine. I had to believe, to pray, that he saw more than the blood on my lips and the bits of flesh I'd bitten off Ben. He had to see the wound in my chest. My lack of clothes. The black, undead tears in my eyes. He held out his hand. Come on. Fear told me to resist, to defend myself and plead my case. But my body moved automatically. Alex put his big denim jacket around my shoulders. It smelled like rain and soil, with an undertone of blood. Or maybe that was me. He didn't grab my arm or push me forward, so I followed in his wake. Out in the hall, I spotted another kicked-in door. Ben's poker buddies were on the floor, with bloody lips and glassy eyes. One of them was clutching the discarded Santa cap. I didn't see the girl with the double Ds, but I suspected she'd fled when Alex had given her the opening. The air was heavy and rank with alcohol, sex, and bad breath. My remaining clothes were on the poker table. I pulled my shirt and pants on while Alex stalked upstairs. The fog coming off him was chilling, even to my undead flesh. In the commotion, the house truly had fallen quiet. The upstairs had thinned out to less than half of its earlier number. A third guy was on his ass next to the front door, the same one who had scoped me out when I'd arrived. He nursed a bloody nose, and the people scattered to get out of Alex's way, well aware of what he was capable of. Some had phones, which meant cameras, but when they saw me, bloodied and wounded, some kind of terrible realization fell over them. That they'd been partying like idiots while people were getting raped downstairs. Maddie. Amy was at the top of the stairs to the second floor. She looked more shit-faced than concerned. Where are you going? I glared at her, turned on my heel, and followed Alex. Ben started screaming as we left. The weather had worsened, unable to decide if it wanted to be wet snow or freezing rain. Despite my growing fear, I took a moment to feel it on my face. All my adrenaline and rage drained away, and exhaustion settled on me again. So much for getting hammered. Alex's pickup was half a block away, probably so the partygoers couldn't ID the plates. He hadn't known I was in trouble, but he'd come to help anyway, and found me eating someone's face. I wanted to run, hide, or cry, but I fell into the passenger seat and kept quiet. He drove us home through blinding rain and empty streets. He kept his eyes on the road. The fog wasn't spilling off him anymore, but that meant nothing. When we reached his place on Sutcliffe Street, I shuffled out of the truck and followed him in through the back door. I liked his place. It was the nicest I'd ever lived in, besides home. The interior was warm and quiet. A comfortable place for an execution. He turned on the kitchen light. Sit down. It wasn't a command, but I was sure he could make me if he wanted. This is it. I sat on the couch with my back to him. His gun was on top of the fridge. Max had bitten me. broke the rule of the gallows. We don't eat the living. He'd killed me, and Alex reanimated me as a white, the only thing he could do to save my life. Then Alex had put a bullet in Max. It's like a rabid dog, like a lost cause. Being dead at the time, I hadn't witnessed it. Max had been ash by the time I rose from my grave. Another trick the necromancer had to cover his tracks. His footsteps approached. I thought about my mom, dad, and my sister. I thought about what I'd done, and I knew I wasn't sorry. Not for someone who had hurt me, tried to force himself on me. But I was so tired. I wanted to rest. Any way that I could. Alex had to do what he had to do. He knelt in front of me. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't want to see it coming. Are you hurt, kid? I blinked. What? Alex was level with my eyes. The expressionless mask had fallen away, and he looked as scared as I felt. He offered me a damp paper towel for the blood on my face. Are you hurt? My breath caught in my throat. Aren't you going to kill me? He leaned back like I'd slapped him. No. The dam broke. I felt a terrible pain in my chest that cracked a gasping sob from my lips. Black tears, a trait among the undead, blinded me. The strength left my limbs, but before I could slide to the floor, Alex caught me in a big hug. I tried to compose myself. Every time I turned around, I was crying about something. But he looked sad for me, where so many people had turned away or offered nothing but contempt, and I couldn't handle it. I broke down in great, heaving, ugly sobs, snotty, slobbery, embarrassing tears. But I didn't care. I pressed my head against his chest and cried. Cried over my life, over my death, and everything between and beyond. Somewhere in that spin cycle of grief, I babbled out a confession about drinking his mead, going to get plastered, and fighting with Ben. I didn't want to bite him, but he wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't leave me alone. I believe you, Alex said. His hands squeezed my shoulders. It's not your fault, Maddie, but I bit him. If the society finds out. He winced. Madelyn MacLaith, if the society wants to cause us trouble because you were defending yourself, they'll have to go through me first. The thought made me grimace. Alex was a small fish in the society. There was nothing he could do if they came calling. They'd kill him in an instant. But he still looked ready to fight them, if he had to. I shivered and wiped blood, snot, and black tears from my face. My middle name isn't Leibowitz. We both smiled, sad as I was. I know you're struggling, kid, he said. It must feel like everything hurts. But we'll make this work no matter what comes our way. I'm on your side, and I always will be. You can find your zen again. Blinking fresh tears, I nodded and sank back into his hug. It didn't feel awkward anymore. When reality came crashing down around me, the scary-looking guy, the necromancer, had been there for me. I wondered if he knew how close I'd come to losing it, if he hadn't been there in the nick of time. You really are a life coach, I murmured. Sorry, I got snot on you. He snorted a quiet laugh. What are shoulders for? Alex didn't say it, but I already knew chemical aids weren't the answer. I didn't care how bad it got. Bad enough I'd fallen off the wagon as fast as I had. Sniffing, I let him go and sat up. I need a shower. Not with a hole in your chest. He offered me the paper towel. While I cleaned my face, I wondered if Ben was getting help or if anyone had called the cops. I decided I didn't care. If the cops came, I'd go to prison. I'd fess to everything. I was okay with it, as long as Alex was still in my corner. How did you know where I was? How'd you know I was in trouble? I read your phone, he said with an apologetic shrug. I was coming to give you a lecture when I heard you scream. My jaw hung. It was dumb luck that he'd found me. Not that I'd needed help fighting off Ben. Turning into another damsel in distress would have made me feel worse. But I'd been so angry. If Alex hadn't arrived, I would have gone over the deep end. Hell, in my head I already had. It was so easy to turn that anger and hate on someone. I shuddered. When I'd cleaned off the blood, he went to the freezer and produced a double-wrapped hunk of mostly frozen meat, fresh off the corpse. Getting myself to eat wasn't easy after all that I'd done, but as soon as the first bite hit my stomach, the hole in my chest started to close. By morning, it would be gone. I washed the meal down with some water. What now? we'd deal with whatever comes our way, he said. But we won't hurry it along. For now, it's almost 4 a.m. Get some shut-eye, eh? After all that, on top of everything before, I pushed to my feet. I'm going to be screaming every 20 minutes, Alex. He looked pensive. You've had a rough night, I know. But maybe there's a workaround. He went into his room and returned with my phone. I wanted to give you this. I took it and smirked. Oh, thanks, my phone. No, smartass. He clicked a few menu options and handed me an earbud. Listen.
Thump, thump, thump. Steady, rhythmic.
The pulse of a living heart. I made it at work, he said. Don't ask me why we keep HRMs in a funeral home, but... He'd recorded 8 hours of his own heartbeat. I put the other earbud in and closed my eyes. Thump. Thump. It made my head lull just to hear it. I was going to cry again. I did. Thank you. Thank me if it helps. He smiled and put a hand on my shoulder. Try to sleep. He started cleaning dishes, and I went into the bathroom, stripped, and ran scalding water over me until I didn't feel like a cold wad of chewed gum anymore. I tossed my clothes into the overflowing laundry hamper. Most of them had escaped the night's violence, but I questioned whether I'd ever wear them again. Sorry, Mary. I sat at my vanity mirror and picked away the piercings that covered my face. The person in the mirror looked different from before. There was still pain and exhaustion, still an ugly road hall of a face, but crying myself hoarse with someone who was there to listen. Maybe I didn't look so beaten down by everything anymore. Like I could hope again. Like I was anchored. It sounded corny, but I liked it. I put on a long shirt, climbed into bed, and turned up the recording on my phone. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. There it was. It was like my brain physically relaxed inside my skull. I wiped away the last of the night's tears. The world was a crazy, awful place, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was alone in it. Like I could go another few rounds, as long as he was in my corner. I closed my eyes and slept like the dead.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Then check out the Necromancer AF series by MG Gallows on Amazon via the link below. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool and keep reading.